So we left off at the general equation for the Krebs cycle and electron transport. And notice here that we have an input of O2, C, and we have an output of CO2. So let's take a step back and see what this looks like. So here are my lungs. And as a byproduct of this reaction, we make CO2. So the cells create CO2. They produce, and then through your circulatory system, they are able to exit. They can travel through your lungs. As a byproduct, and they can escape. So we breathe out CO2. And O2, on the other hand, this is how we breathe it in. This is how it becomes one of our reactants. We breathe in O2. Very similarly, via the bloodstream, it can reach our cells. So they can be used to, so we can have these reactions. Okay, so we took care of respiration. Now for the anaerobic parts, so without oxygen. So for the anaerobic parts. And this is without oxygen. And the first part is the same as before, is glycolysis. And this is where we take a glucose, and this becomes 2 molecules of pyruvate. So step 2 now depends on the organism and what the oxygen situation is. So for yeast are a type of fungus, so they are a type of fungus. They take pyruvate. So here is your pyruvate. And what they do with this is, I want you to keep this part of the molecule in mind. And notice this is simply a carbon and 2 oxygens, or this is CO2. And this is actually one of our products. So we have CO2. We have CO2, which is a gas. And this is why when you are baking bread, the bread will begin to rise because it is full of these gas molecules. So these gas molecules are causing the bread to rise. This is because of fermentation. And the second product that we have from this is this structure right here, and there is a hydrogen there. This is a 2-carbon structure, 1, 2. We can call this acetaldehyde, or you can call it ethanol. So what happens to this structure is it is going to get reduced. This is a type of reaction where it is going to gain electrons, and thus it's going to gain electrons and hydrogen. We're going to be focusing on this bond right here. So here's what we're going to be left with. So notice now we have a couple more hydrogens. This compound here, this is ethanol. And we use ethanol, for fuel, and we can also use it, as a preservative. Okay. So yeast makes CO2, and it also makes a type of alcohol known as ethanol. So we can call these reactions, alcohol fermentation. Fermentation because O2 was not required. Okay, so now for some kinds of bacteria. Again, our starting material is our pyruvate, and this is going to become a familiar molecule. This was our 3-carbon pyruvate. This is a 2-carbon acid. So a 2-carbon acid here this is called acetic acid. And when you go shopping and you get yourself some vinegar, it is composed of acetic acid. So we can use bacteria to create things for us, like vinegar. Okay. So now some types of fungi and bacteria can do something else to our pyruvate. Again, starting material is pyruvate. We are going to undergo another reduction reaction, and we're going to be concerned with this carbonyl right here. So again, reduction means to gain electrons, or we are also going to be gaining some protons, some hydrogens, you'll notice. Okay. So we also have this because carbon always needs 4 bonds, but everything else is the same. This structure here, this is known as lactate. If this were to attach to a proton that were floating by, it's the same structure, but now we can call it lactic acid. So these guys are interchangeable, just add a proton. Okay. And lactic acid, we can use this reaction to create us, cheese, yogurt, things of that nature. Something similar happens in humans. When we undergo strenuous exercise, this basically translates to, we're not getting enough oxygen. Not getting enough oxygen. So we can call this an oxygen debt. And this means that we can't really do aerobic respiration. We cannot complete aerobic respiration. Let's say cannot perform aerobic respiration. What this means is that we're going to do glycolysis. And then we're going to do fermentation. Reactions that don't require oxygen. Okay. So again, the first step under our human going through this oxygen debt is going to take glucose. We're going to make pyruvate. And this is going to undergo a reduction reaction. Just like before, this one is going to reduce this carbonyl up here. We are going to be left with the same product as before. We're going to make lactate. Lactate, or if you were to add a proton, this becomes lactic acid. And then we are going to, if this oxygen debt continues, we are going to build up lactic acid. This can contribute to an acidic blood pH. Acidic blood pH. Or we can call this acidosis, which isn't good for our bodies. It can mess up many things in our body. Okay. So now, from the Krebs cycle reaction before, the goal of Krebs cycle electron transport was to make ATP. And this comes from the building blocks of ATP, ADP plus PI. We also used pyruvate, which came from glucose. We also use oxygen. The other two products that we care about are H2O and CO2. So H2O and CO2 can combine to form an acid called carbonic acid. Carbonic acid. And carbonic acid, one reason why it's an acid is that it can give up or donate one of its protons. So it gave up a proton there, the leftover molecule is this, and to balance out, it has a negative charge. So this is the bicarbonate anion. Bicarbonate anion. And this H2CO3 or carbonic acid is known as a diprotic acid because it can give up a second proton. And that's what I'm going to draw right here. Gave up its second proton, and we are left with this. And we can call this the carbonate anion. Okay. If you were to put this into something called phenol red, this detects acid. It changes color, like so. It will turn yellow in acidic pH. So phenol red turns yellow in acidic pH. And we use this in the lab, to determine if this reaction up here, this reaction here was taking place. We can see if this acid was formed. And if this acid forms, it'll change the color phenol red.